introduce you and then
cool.
go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Barbara Millet. I'm a faculty member at the Interactive Media Department. Thank you for your attendance and welcome to the Ribeiro Innovation Speaker Series. It is my pleasure to introduce Michelle Carney. Michelle is a computational neuroscientist turned UX researcher whose practice focuses on the intersection of data science and UX. She currently teaches at Stanford d.school and is a senior UX researcher at Google's TensorFlow team. Her projects are focused on combining machine learning and UX. Her talk today is going to focus on a human-centered approach to designing systems of machine learning, and she's going to provide us with a case study that demonstrates her process. Michelle is also going to give you some tips on how to integrate your machine learning UX projects into your portfolio, and there's also going to be a 15-minute Q&A. Michelle?
Awesome. Thank you for that intro. Yes. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to meet you. It's so nice to also, I know that during this time, we're all like, we see each other's faces and stuff, but it's nice to hear a little bit about you or just read about you in the chat. I'll also share too, as Barbara mentioned, I will take questions at the end if that's okay. And will actually have Barbara figure out like who gets to ask what question and when. But that being said, please throughout the talk, post your questions in the chat. I think that's probably the best way, also for this recording as well. And maybe I can try to address some of them as we go through. But it is so nice to meet all of you virtually and hear about your backgrounds. And so let's get started. Woohoo. Today, we are going to be talking about ML plus UX, building ML products for people. And just a little bit about this talk too. This is kind of like a sampler or a variety of resources for you to kind of dive deeper. After this talk, I would love it if all of us are experts in ML and UX, but this is just kind of like a kicking off point, and I hope that this sparks your interest or maybe gives you more resources to go read. It's also kind of like a summary of like over the last like 5 or so years, my process of doing early stage UX research on ML and AI systems. So yeah, let's get started. Hi, I'm Michelle. This is me. Jeez. So yes, as the intro mentioned, I am a senior UX researcher at TensorFlow, which is an open source machine learning tool from Google. And I am also the founder and organizer of the MLUX meetup, and I teach at the Stanford d.school. If this is at all of interest, you are totally welcome to follow us on Twitter. I'm going to be talking a little bit about those. I hate how it combines them together, but whatever, it's fine. But feel free to check those out. I know that there's a lot of students in the room, so I thought it might be nice to kind of share a little bit about my journey about like, how did I end up here? So I studied, as we were talking about, computational neuroscience, which really was a double major in cognitive science and molecular cell biology at UC Berkeley. I was in the same research group that studied IPython notebooks. I'm not sure if you all are familiar. I see some people from the engineering department, but IPython notebooks was the original version of Jupyter notebooks or Colab notebooks. It's kind of like the Google Docs of editing your Python code, which is really fun. So yeah, so some of my first jobs were converting MATLAB code into like, hey, this eigenvector transformation, does the scikit-learn IPython notebooks do the same exact thing? Like literally the math side of it. But I realized that just because like you have a model and you've optimized it to some like nth degree, it doesn't mean that people are going to actually perceive a difference. So that's really how I got interested in UX research, was, you know, when we would put things in front of folks. And so I got very lucky, and I was able to find an opportunity at Visa, like the credit card company's innovation team. They were looking for someone with a quantitative background who also had experience in running labs, and I'm like, oh, choose me. So I worked there for a little bit, and it was fantastic. It was a great way to kind of like learn how to take my very academic like skill set and like, what does that look like now in practice and industry? I went from sampling, like doing research with like, what, 50 to 200 people to like, okay, we're gonna do research on 6 people, and that's gonna decide how we design something for millions of people. And so like, definitely that was like a big turn for me. It was an awesome opportunity, but I was really missing my background in doing data science, machine learning, all that type of stuff too. So I actually went back to grad school at the UC Berkeley School of Information, really focusing on, how do we combine data science, machine learning, and UX? And I'll talk about that in a second. That's when I made the MLUX meetup. And then Amazon Music decided to take a chance, and I was the first machine learning and UX joint hire for Amazon. So I went through the ML process as well as UX process to kind of be like, hey, like, how do we take these really cool ML models that we have and turn them into potential products, or how do we test them out early on and everything too? And that's what I'll be talking about a little bit today. But yeah, then now I've landed here at Google, where I am a senior UX researcher. As you can tell, I've kind of bounced between data science and UX throughout my entire career. So now I'm in the UX research arm of it. So excited to talk to so many UX researchers in the audience. So I'll also be drawing a little bit on the class that I teach. If this is at all of interest to you educators, I'm happy to continue the conversation or have a follow-up chat as well. But I have gotten feedback from my students on some things that I should include for portfolio stuff. So that's what I'll be dropping in here there. The last thing that I'll mention too is I know that some folks are maybe better at reading case studies than listening to them. So here is a written up version of this talk. I'll be sharing a bunch of links. And so I've already tweeted them out for another talk, but you can actually follow along there on that Twitter thread. So if you're like, wait, what was that URL or anything, you can actually just click and open it there. Yeah, let's get started. So today I will be talking a little bit about like, what is machine learning in UX? Then I'll be talking about one of my favorite resources, which is the People AI Guidebook or the PAIR Guidebook. And then I will talk about that case study. And like I mentioned too, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. And I'm excited to help you on your learning journey. So what is machine learning in UX? I know some of you are thinking about it. This is a question that I get all the time about like, those are very cool, interesting fields. How do they like go together? Those are two separate job categories. Well, how I like to think about it is, how do we use data science, machine learning techniques in order to inform and drive UX design decisions? But also, how do we design better experiences that help users understand what's happening with their data? How do they control their data? How do they give feedback to the system? So it's really like two sides of the same coin. And I will say for all of the UXers in the room, just to clarify, UX is so much more than pixels on a page. Like I say that I'm a UXer, but you could tell by my slide design, like I do mostly black and white slides. Like you do not want me designing your colors. So I really think about like UX is truly the experience that the user is going to be going through. That could take a bunch of different forms, from the copywriting, the information architecture. We should also be thinking about the user experience of the machine learning models, these algorithms, where they're going to live in our users' lives. And also I saw some folks interested in AI and data science. Yes, I'm also just boiling that down to data. You'll also see me use this interchangeably. I think that it's because our users think about them interchangeably. They don't really know which part's AI, which part's like data science, or even just like what part is logic that just feels intelligent. Yes, it can be so much more than just data. It could even be statistical methods and everything too. But so when these two come together, they make really interactive and engaging experiences like this. So this is one of my favorite examples. It's actually Pinterest's visual discovery tool. So they've rolled out a different feature of this now. But what we're seeing here in this GIF, and I hope it's not too choppy for you, is that we can see that someone is scrolling through a bunch of images, and then they click on a picture of a pizza in the lower right-hand corner, and it reseeds the search screen with images that look similar to that pizza, with more images of pizza. So we don't actually need to know what is going on behind the scenes. It could be something like, yes, you can imagine for every like little card that they have like a computer vision model that's saying like, here are 3 other similar images. And so just quickly repopulate that so that way it feels like you're reseeding the search with other computer vision similar things. It could be something more NLP based or natural language processing based, where they look at the hashtags of like, maybe someone has done hashtag margarita pizza or something, and they just reseed it that way too. But I think the important thing is that the experience of this isn't making the user having to, when they find something that they're interested in, they're not having to like articulate that and go back up into the search bar and try to type that out or something like that too. They're able to quickly and easily, using the power of machine learning, go about their task of finding more things similar to what they just found. So I think like that's a really powerful example of this. Another one is, I really like the Google keyboard type ahead. Again, like we see someone saying, I got into law school, congratulations, let's party. And the keyboard is suggesting gifts around partying. So that to me, it could be something where it's like entity recognition and like more natural language processing, or it could just be something that's like logic of like, hey, when people say party, they most of the time attach a GIF. And so like, let's just suggest the GIF on the keyboard. Regardless, it feels like an intelligent experience where like AI is helping you like, you know, do a task that you would have already done. And the last one that I kind of want to share, this one isn't an interactive GIF. It is a image of a bunch of different types of nurses, but this actually comes from the head of data science at Getty Images. They're thinking actively about like, well, what does it mean? Like we have a great responsibility at Getty Images about like people using our images for all types of material. So do we show the current nursing staff, which is primarily female, or do we try to show an ideal like split, like 50-50 male and female? And like, how do we calculate distances and like calculate, you know, diversity in image sets when it comes to actual the data science and machine learning numbers of it? So that's another great example of that too, about like, hey, you know, whose future are we designing for? And that's something too that I want to leave back with you all about, like really think about like, the things that we make in the world have implications. And so really think about like, hey, whose future are we designing for? And I don't think that there's a right or wrong answer or something to, just something to consider. So I have written up this and so many other examples too. If you're interested, I'll share the link right here in this, what is MLUX. So that's kind of what I think about when I think of examples of it in the field and what I'm kind of talking about. The other thing is too, I hosted a meetup on this. I kind of feel a little bit like, hey, my garage band is playing down at the local bar, but like, we're pretty big. I think like in total we have, I mean, it's spread across different platforms, about 4,000 members. We've done events at the World Trade Center and at Salesforce Tower here in San Francisco. Also open call, we're now doing virtual events. So any students, if you're interested, you could totally follow along and join us on virtual events. So we've been going for about 4 years. And if you couldn't tell, I'm a huge proponent of like being able to share out all the things that we're doing and, you know, just being able to learn from each other. So we actually record all of our talks and post them on our YouTube channel if that's of interest for you too. But really my big thing that I want to share with you is that we really aim to create a collaborative environment between UX, data science, and everyone in between. And we aim to organize that community to foster cooperation and really share those best practices. I don't think it's going to be like a single company who ends up, making the design guidelines for all of UX and ML or anything, right? There's going to be different lenses, different opportunities, different applications. So that's why it's really important for us to document and share and have conversations about this. And our designs are going to change as the AI changes and as it becomes more approachable and we can do other designs around it. So that's kind of like our vision of like our meetup of what we're trying to do. And how we actually do that is we host regular tech talks, panels, sharing those best practices, as well as like happy hours and that kind of stuff too, to meet other folks in the community. The reason why I'm saying this, for any students in the room who might be looking for jobs or anything too, this is a great opportunity to meet people in the field about like, hey, what is it that you do? What is your company doing? And get out there and just kind of like see other opportunities and options. So I think I shared this before too, but one of the best ways to find out about our next and upcoming meetups, which I'll share in a second, is our Twitter channel there. Okay, so this is kind of a little bit of what it looks like when we used to do more in-person events. So a lot of like, we do everything from, you know, chatbots and multimodal to AI for social good to like, how do you do startup stuff when you don't have a lot of data, but you want to think about the user experience. So and so much more. I just wanted to give a shout out. All of our events are free because of our amazing sponsors and community partners and everything like that too. So just thank you to everyone who's helped make this possible. And you all are invited. That's kind of like the TLDR. Come to our virtual events. We would love to have you. So when I first started the meetup about 4 years ago, it was very much because like no one was really talking about this. I was like, hey, how do we kind of like combine these two? How do I meet other people in the field? But exciting news, there's actually more and more jobs popping up that are kind of in the intersection of this. So IDEO, which is traditionally a design consultancy, they now have a data science practice, which I am so excited about. That's kind of like, in my mind, a little bit like a machine learning prototyper role, where you really are trying out early stage machine learning and data science models to kind of see, hey, what works, what doesn't. As well as jobs like this. This is a job posting from Apple, looking for a UX UI designer to bridge the gap between design and machine learning. What? Oh my gosh, this is so exciting. TLDR, I have only seen a rise of these types of roles, as well as resource guidelines and like kind of like, hey, you know, there's really great stuff coming out of Microsoft. Like here's their Kai paper up in the upper left around guidelines for human AI interaction. I think that came from Kai 2019. Some of the stuff that I worked on at Stanford around I Love Algorithms. And one of my favorite resources, which we'll talk about, is the PAIR Guidebook. But there's just so many resources that have recently come up in like literally the last year. I actually have made a very long resource list. It's a little bit intimidating, I will admit. It's very much like a long link list. Think of it as like a literature review where I've grouped it roughly by company and by topic. I encourage you, if you are interested in this, take a look at maybe like, how does a data science team work with a design team? Spotify has a bunch of great examples of that. Interactive visualizations, definitely take a look there. Yes, and if you're interested in like a specific part of it and you don't even know where to start, always feel free to tweet at me and I'm happy to kind of be like, hey, take a look at this one or that one. Remember, I read these for fun, so like I'm always happy to do this. So as I mentioned, today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite resources, the PAIR Guidebook. So fun fact, I actually didn't work on the PAIR Guidebook. I think I mentioned too, I work at Google. Today I'm not representing Google in any way, shape, or form. I'm really just representing myself as an organizer of MLUX and enthusiast of this field. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that this guidebook was a big reason for me to come to Google. So I was at Amazon before, like I shared, and I had made like a couple of like, design guidelines for AI. It was like a 5-bullet list or something. And then all of a sudden this guidebook came out and I was like, whoa, like record scratch, like this is awesome. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Now that I've joined, I've actually learned the backstory, which was over 100 internal Googlers came together for like a giant summit to like mind meld about like, for the future of AI and design, what are like the best practices and things that everyone should know? They first made it internal to Google and then they opened it up for everyone. So that's why I'm so excited to share it with you all today, is because I think it's an amazing roundup of it. And I'll also share too the guidebook. It's not like a typical guidebook. Barbara and I were just talking about this. Typically when I hear the word guidebook, I'm like, yes, there's like an intro chapter and whatever. But no, this is truly like a pick and choose your own adventure. Like you could start with whatever chapter. Really think about where you are in your process and maybe think about, where are some open questions you might have. And they have really great examples in there too. For students who might be working on portfolio pieces, this might be a great opportunity for you to kind of think about using external sources. And I would actually strongly recommend the worksheets. So they have worksheets for every chapter too. They have really great guiding questions. And I'm going to go through some of those guiding questions today. But maybe as you go through whatever your project is or portfolio piece, I know that when I run some design workshops, I really like using like different lenses or different constraints about like, hey, if we wanted to really focus on explainability and trust, what might this look like? Maybe think about that too, of like, hey, we designed this thing, but we weren't sure what direction to go in. So we looked at it from 3 different lenses, the data collection, like what would be a very data collective or like, giving users the ability to give feedback kind of way to design this. So just some kind of things that I think about. Yes, and so the guidebook is in 6 chapters, as I mentioned. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to talk about 3 of my favorites today. And like I mentioned too, please feel free to peruse all the chapters, but also like if you're just like, oh my gosh, I need something more on explainability, like just go straight there. That's great. This is just like a choose what resonates with you. So one of the chapters that I really love that I think isn't talked about enough in the field of user research that I see is the mental models when you are designing an AI or ML system. So this is really important to kind of consider because as cool as your ML model might be, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's really important to think about how are your users currently solving this problem? How is this model going to live in their overall ecosystem? Really think about like how might they perceive it and want to use it too. And some guiding questions that always stand out to me are things like, you know, what are the pros and cons of introducing our AI as human-like? I think that's something, especially for chatbots and voice assistants, like we aim to make them, oh yes, let's like have it be like a human. But I'm sure some of us, I know for me, I've definitely tried, you know, the chatbots for returning packages and stuff. And then it's all like, hi, I'm Bob. I can help you return a package. I'm like, hi, Bob. So great to meet you. Thanks so much for your help today. And then it's like, you can say return package. And I'm like, well, if you just introduced yourself as a robot, like instead of giving yourself a name, like a human-like name and all this stuff too, I wouldn't have like gone out of my way to, you know, try to engage with you like a human. Like you're setting up the boundaries about like what this AI can and cannot do. Also, should it be an open text field? Maybe it should be something like a series of buttons where you can actually see how you can interact with this and still get your task across. So some things like that. The other thing is, how should we introduce our AI to the user initially and thereafter? Like it might be something too where you might want to invest in a little bit of education up front and it might change after the fact. The other thing is that I really want to highlight is feedback and control. This is super important because, you know, with machine learning models, it's a little bit different than just a typical like happy journey through like, let's just say checkout experience or something, right? There might be things where you make recommendations to your users. You will want them to give you feedback on those recommendations or personalizations. And what do you actually do with that? How do you communicate to about like, hey, great, thank you for letting me know about that. This is how I will use it in the future. You will see more of this. You won't see more of this, that kind of thing as well. I think a really classic example is on Amazon when you buy a vacuum and then it's like, oh my gosh, you're starting a vacuum collection. Here's 15 other vacuums, but I don't know about you all, like when I buy a vacuum, I'm like done with the vacuum buying process. Like I don't want more recommendations on vacuums. That task is done. As well as like some things to think about, including implicit and explicit user feedback. So thinking about like, hey, when someone might add something to their cart, that might be an implicit feedback around like, hey, I'm interested in this and I want to save it for later, versus explicit being like, oh, I actually purchased it. And like, what does that mean? And how does that weight in the system? And the last part that I just want to highlight is around errors and failing gracefully. So this is really important because machine learning is probabilistic. Therefore, there will always be times when it fails. So it is important to design for those failures. And some things that I like to consider is like, you know, how do we maybe communicate those low confidence predictions or things that were like, hey, we're, you know, thinking this, but if that's not right, how do we go back, feedback controls and let users tell us a little bit more about that? As well as like communicating why they got that error of like, oh, and it might not even be an error to your system, right? That's another thing to think about. It's an error to the user. So, oh, you know, here's your vacuum collection. Oh, well, you're seeing this because you recently purchased a vacuum. I'm done with my vacuum buying process. Let the user give that feedback to the system. Okay, so that was a lot, and there is so much more in this guidebook. So these are just like scratching the surface. And I strongly recommend whatever part of that resonates with you, feel free, take a look, think about that. Think about those questions as provocations for your design process too. And I'm not seeing any questions, which hopefully y'all are tracking along with me and that is just so straightforward, but also do please feel free to ask questions in the chat and stuff too. I'm gonna move into the last portion, which is the case study. So we talked a little bit about MLUX, about like what it is as a field. We talked a little bit about one of my favorite resources, the PAIR Guidebook, and how I kind of like to think about it. Now I'm going to have us put on let's pretend we work at a startup in like extremo stealth mode. And like, we have not done any UX research. We're brand new. We're going to do personalized travel. And this is our product. personalized travel app. Ooh, ah. So this is kind of like a reflection on my process from a bunch of different prior research on AI and ML systems. I've not ever worked on travel, just to be clear, but hopefully there's part of this, just like the PAIR guidebook, that you can kind of pick and choose. Maybe there's something that really resonates with you and you'd like to use as a part of your practice. So let's say that I was brought on as a UX researcher before any ML is done. I like to think maybe there are kind of 3 different styles or parts of research that if I have the luxury of being brought on in the very beginning that I like to do. So first and foremost, I like starting with generative research if I'm in a very early stage AI kind of a place where we're not even quite sure what it is the problem that we're solving. And I like to really double check or really think about like, hey, how are people, currently solving these problems? Where are opportunities for AI and stuff too? Then once we kind of have that feedback, I will work with our team to come up with a concept, like what makes sense. And this also does not need to have machine learning. This can be something too that is like your Figmas or neural boards or something too. That's really just like, how do we test the concept? Does this flow even make sense if we're using machine learning for it? And I'll talk about that in a second too. And the last part, once we actually have our working prototype or model, then I do like doing this at scale and unmoderated, really evaluating, does this prototype work? And the reason why is I love getting those edge cases. Remember, machine learning is probabilistic, so it will fail. So it's really important to test it on a bunch of users. And so just getting their feedback is so important. So talking about generative research, this is really important before you do any concepts or anything too. It's really important for new domains. Hypothetically, on that chatbot or AI assistant modality, maybe this is something, if we're thinking about our travel app, we might think like, oh, well, let's have users, if we want them chatting or using their voice and chatting, how might they recommend places to travel to a friend, to a colleague? Like, let's kind of understand their mental model around how they're making recommendations. And is it different than necessarily like the flow, like TripAdvisor or Kayak, right? They only allow so many different things, but they might not ask questions like, are you traveling with your grandparents? Because I know that you have grandparents or kids or something like that. Or maybe, an example of really great feedback that I've gotten from users is like something equivalent to like, I only book flights that are only an hour total. Like, I don't like being on flights. And like, can you search that in our current systems? No, but that's why it's really important to kind of understand our users' mental models and think about like, oh, wait, this is something that they might recommend to a friend because they know their friend only wants to travel for an hour, that kind of thing too. One great way to evaluate these types of ideas or just getting these thoughts going is using a triptych method. So here is a video of it. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's essentially like a storyboarding technique for generative research, and it can help you with understanding frequency and prioritizing like exactly what are true AI problems that AI can solve. Is this an actual solution? And what might be other ideas for resolutions and everything too. So yes, so kind of getting started, I think that's always really important. It's also very fun for those students out there. Totally feel free to look into more generative research methods and everything too. It's not something that you might always get the luxury to do when you are at a company and stuff too, because it's like, great, we already have this product. And you're like, okay, let's think about this some more. So definitely I would recommend trying a project with it. So let's say that we actually have our feedback now. We can actually use the feedback from the generative research to create a concept. And when I say concept, I'm really talking about like no machine learning required. Your machine learning teams can be working on this in parallel. That's actually how I like to do it. I prefer to do this also moderated and in person, more like a usability session, because I can ask questions like, why? Like, can you tell me a little bit more about that? What are you trying to do? How might you currently try to solve this and everything too? Another method that I've seen and that is pretty common in this stage is Wizard of Oz testing. And for those of you who might not be familiar, it's essentially like, in Wizard of Oz, the person behind the curtain is like controlling the system and it makes it look smart and intelligent. So sometimes what I will do is I will either be the wizard as someone who's like typing out the things that the chatbot is saying, or like what the voice assistant might be saying, but I might have someone else moderating the study and being like, is this what you expected? What are your thoughts on this? That kind of thing. So definitely a method you can use, and really helpful to understand, like, if I were following the script that I've outlined for this experience, does this even make sense? Because really, as a UX researcher, you should be testing out those inputs and outputs. Do those even make sense for the end user? And designing and testing the North Star of the experience. You do not need machine learning to actually be implemented for this stage. So you might be wondering, wait, I'm working on a personalized travel app. How does this even work? I can't get personalized information that way. So how I actually like to do this is I create a custom prototype for each participant. That might seem like a lot of work. I'm going to tell you it's not that much more work. So when you are surveying your potential participants for, when are you available to come in and give your feedback and everything too, you might want to ask some questions that can inform the prototype in the survey. So you might ask some questions like, how often are you searching for travel? Where are your top 3 places to travel? Where do you never want to travel? All this stuff too, because you can also let them know in the survey, like, hey, this is something that your feedback is going to be incredibly important, and we might use for when you come in and give your feedback to us. The other thing that I really want to mention is, like, it's okay if it isn't exactly perfect. Machine learning is sometimes wrong. Remember, in that errors and failing gracefully chapter, we do want examples of where this isn't going to be exactly 100%, because we want to know how users are going to deal with those edge cases. And that's also equally important to capture that feedback in this early stage concept. So also, I want to acknowledge, I see questions coming in. They are very long. I'm going to finish this and then we could get to questions. Cool. Awesome. So we've made our travel app. Awesome. Fantastic. It looks great. So let's just say Barbara, just because I've been chatting with you, we've surveyed Barbara, and she is really interested in large cities. So awesome. She is less interested in Roswell, New Mexico. And she filled that out in her survey, and now I've been able to make a custom prototype just for her. I will also say too, in this custom prototype, I might only update the first like half of the panel. Remember, like, I don't need to do all of the things below. I might just keep this, the same for all of my participants. And 2, if, my participant is all like, oh, I want to click on Paris, like, that looks really interesting, I'll be like, that's a really great point. I don't think Paris is wired up yet. This is a very early concept. Let's click on LA instead. What are your thoughts? What do you think will be there? So only wiring up like one single flow. So it might feel like a lot to do custom prototypes for every user, but actually it's so worth it when you're testing out something like personalization and just understanding, like, hey, you just need to do a couple of screens to get the concept across and get that feedback. So some questions that I really like asking during this phase 2 are, first and foremost, is this what you expected? Machine learning leads to interesting things. And so given like, what you think of travel and everything too, is this something that you would have expected? The other thing too is, how does the model know? I think that's really important too. So something like, oh, well, I would have expected this to tie back into this account, and like it just grabbed that information from there, or maybe it scraped my Gmail or something like that too. It's having users explain back to you how they think the model would work and how they think that the system is presenting this information gives you insight as to what they are comfortable with as well as not comfortable with in terms of data, privacy, also how they would expect to give the system feedback. Maybe it's something where when they were setting up this app, they indicated these trips or places to travel to or something like that too. Remember, you're testing the inputs, that's the input side, and the outputs, what they're seeing. Does this even make sense to them? The other thing is, what happens when it's wrong? Remember, we included that Roswell, New Mexico example. Why is that even there? How would you actually go in and change it? Maybe it's something like, oh, well, I share this account with the sibling and my sibling's really interested in aliens, so that's why. And it's like, oh, I would have never guessed that from this experience, right? And understanding, having the user explain it back to me about shared accounts or something like that too. And also how they would want to actually change it is a really important part of that. The other big one that I really want to stress is, how would it change over time? So remember, like, if this is something dynamic and personalization, maybe they do take that trip to LA, right? Now what happens? 6 months later, does LA still show up? Do they have to indicate it? Does it pull from other information. What does that intelligent experience kind of look like? And so you could tell this is a very scrappy prototype, but it's still enough to really test, like, does this concept work for people? And is this enough? Like, if this were to be AI-ified, would this be a good product? Yeah? Okay. And the last kind of thing the last phase of my research plan or things that I do is evaluating the prototype. So this is really once you have the minimal viable product of your ML model working in your prototype. So I remember with the evaluating concept, your ML team, they might be watching some of those user studies along with you and be like, oh, that's a really great point. I wasn't thinking about that. Or maybe you synthesize the findings and you give them a highlight reel of like, here, this is why we can't go in this direction. So really think about these inputs and these outputs. And let's go and build the model. And so now once they've actually made the model and it works in even a low fidelity prototype, I prefer to do this unmoderated, and I'll explain a little bit. I prefer to do this as a contextual inquiry and usability on the model. The reason is the contextual inquiry is really asking users, how do you currently solve this problem? What does this look like for you? And then we can give them access to the prototype and really be like, does this solve this problem? I understand, like, oh, you're a heavy like kayak user, or oh, you do a bunch of looking up places ahead of time on Google Maps or something like that. So you would want all these things to kind of like in your trip booking process to be a part of a personalized experience. So yes, and yeah, like I mentioned, feedback at scale on the edge cases of your system. There is no way that you will bring in enough people into your lab to test it, especially if you're designing for millions of people. As great as lab spaces are, and you could try as hard as you can, but there will just be people using it in interesting ways that you were not expecting. For example, especially with voice user interfaces, a lab might be a very sterile environment where people are just talking into their phone or something like that too. But how these devices are actually going to live, it's like people are getting on the train or in their very busy kitchen, and like there might be other people talking in the background. So that's why it's really important to kind of get it a version that's in situ, and is really interesting. That also might lead to more design applications for you. So as I mentioned, I typically do this phase with the control, the contextual inquiry. How do you currently plan your trips? Then I use an experimental condition, try using this prototype to plan a trip. And then I allow for reflection. Like, what are your thoughts? What are your feedback? And what are your ideas? I'll also say too, I really think that even with the control and experimental, ask your users for like 5 or 6 entries. Like, give me a bunch of examples of like how you currently plan trips, because there's going to be a bunch of different things that you're going to want to do. Same with the experimental. Maybe the first time you use the AI prototype, it doesn't really work that well, but maybe the second time you see, oh wait, it learned from the last time and I would have expected this or that. And so how are they trying to use it over time? And then having the users kind of really think about, how is it maybe doing things better or worse, or things to change or other opportunities is crucial. So I made this talk for D.Scout, and so I actually am a heavy user of D.Scout, but that being said, you could do this on WhatsApp, you could do this on a bunch of different ways. Asking folks to do a screen recording is a great example of that, as well as like D.Scout allows you to do like survey questions, kind of like Snapchat meets Qualtrics, or I guess TikTok is the thing. I don't know. You all are cooler than me. But so this is why I use it that way. You can see people are showing us their exact screen of like, hey, I'm on Kayak and I'm looking for X, Y, or Z. The other thing is to they asking them to do maybe selfie videos or videos using their device of like, oh, you're so kind. Using like, oh, here's like how I was trying to book it, but here's it on my computer. And so this person, Ben, he's doing a selfie for me of like, hey, here's me, and I'm like trying to use the prototype and it's not working. So I go to my computer and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crucial. You're using multiple devices. I wouldn't have known that if I just brought you into a lab, right? So this is really important. And the last part, the reflection, this could take a whole variety of different ways, but just asking people, even in sentences and checkboxes, whatever that kind of looks like, reflect on their experience. Okay, so we talked about this, and that was a part of the larger overall kind of like research plan that I typically would do. I will also say too, this is not like a 1 week process. Do not feel intimidated. This is like a 1.5 years of UX research strategy that I just laid out for you. And this is kind of me reflecting on like a bunch of work that I've done over the last 5 years and like kind of picking and choosing. I also would recommend, there might be some parts of this where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm working on a project right now. This could be really powerful if I, use that question or technique, or, think about the pair guidebook. Maybe I want to evaluate the concept some more. Like maybe you could do a portfolio piece that's just on evaluating a concept of AI to show and demonstrate like, hey, I'm a designer for AI and ML systems. Like that would also be equally powerful. And there's a bunch of, if you're interested in like, coding with existing machine learning models. There's TensorFlow.js as well as ML5.js, really already existing ML frameworks with pre-trained models, so you don't need to train it yourself. Okay, so that was a lot. But if you're interested in learning more, I would always recommend checking out the pair People AI Research website, mostly because yes, they have the guidebook. It's great. Big reason why I joined Google. Can you tell that I'm a fan? It's awesome. But they also have like AI explorables, which are really great ways, like design kind of explorations into like, how do I even look into my AI? What's happening? What if I change this? And it's just kind of fun provocations for you to kind of understand machine learning a little bit more, as well as tools and platforms if you're more interested in like, hey, I want to integrate something into my code and that kind of thing too, for those of you who might be technical in the audience. And I know that I mentioned this too, but take a look at that MLUX research resources log list if you are at all interested. I will share it again here. Oops, I think I just sent that directly to you, Barbara. Sorry, I'm zooming through the Zoom. The last thing that I will share is if this is of interest and you want to learn more and you want to talk to people, you all are totally invited to the MLUX meetup. Our next event is actually going to be on the 28th of this month. Oh, thank you. Here is the event. It is on a Kai paper around designing AI explainability features with Millet out of Switzerland. So we are really trying to take advantage of the remoteness of the time and get folks from other places that we normally wouldn't reach. So if that is of interest, totally join in. It is free. And the last thing I'll kind of end on is it's free because we're part of the larger feminist AI community, reimagining AI for everybody. So of course you all are students, so like do not feel pressured to like go to the GoFundMe. Mostly saying this because if you are at all interested, I do free tutorials on AI and machine learning on the Feminist AI Medium blog post. I also am, we're actively working to do more programming like curriculum to allow anyone to kind of pick up wherever they are in AI and just kind of learn and explore and play. So definitely take a look there. MLUX is a part of this larger Feminist AI community. Okay, exactly 15 minutes left. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to the MLUX team. There's actually a bunch of volunteers who helped make this possible. So thank you to all of those folks. Thank you to Barbara. Thank you to Kim. And just thank you to all of you for listening and staying on. If you want to say hi, you can always email me, michelle@mluxsf.com, or tweet at me. That's another great way to get in contact. So great.
Michelle, we had 3 questions.